Can you hear me, Renee?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you.
And Mayor Allen, the stream has started, so you may commence when you are ready.
Call the meeting to order. I'll have a mover and seconder, please, to do that. Councillor Hanna and Councillor Ma, that the special meeting of the Council of the Township Springwater of December 14, 2020 come to order at 2:01 p.m. All those in favor? That is carried. Due to COVID, Council is taking the precautions to limit in-person meetings. So we are having a virtual meeting today with everybody tuning in by Zoom. You can watch the meeting live on the Township's website at www.springwater.ca. You can listen to it on the telephone by dialing 647-558-0588 and using the ID 833-4751-0974 and the pound sign. And for those unable to do either of those and want to look at it later, you can see it on the Township's YouTube channel by tuning into the website. There's a link there. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest, Council? All right, I will now call upon Mr. Gregory Bender of WSP Consultants to provide Council with a presentation on the cannabis study review and findings. Mr. Bender.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Your Worship, and members of Council and staff. It's my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon on sort of a double feature, the cannabis presentation as well as the official plan project.
Now, Mr. Bender, do you want questions throughout the presentation or wait till the end of it?
It's a very good question. I was asked by members of my team. I think I'm happy to take questions throughout. Okay. Given the levels of interest in the official plan presentation, we've separated into sort of 3 segments. And if it's appropriate with Council, I'm fine to take the questions at the end of sort of each segment, if that makes sense.
But we're starting with the cannabis presentation. Yes.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. Well, members of Council will put their cards up when they want to ask a question. I'll just jump in and direct them. Okay.
That works for me. I think the signs are a great. I actually haven't been part of a council meeting where they've used signs, so I think it's a really good way of doing that. With sharing my screen, I won't be able to see necessarily the cameras, so you're welcome to interrupt there.
Thank you.
During the presentation.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Your Worship, members of Council. The intent today is to walk all of you through and provide you with a bit of a summary from the last meeting we had on August 24th, just to provide some context before we get into sort of the updates, some of the results of the public consultation, and then some of the recommendations on the report. Again, just to provide a bit of a summary, I'm not going to get into any of this in a great level of detail, but just to provide that context, we did look at the various pieces of the legislative context, including the Cannabis Act, the Municipal Guide, the Provincial Policy Statement, the Growth Plan, and the County of Simcoe Official Plan. And we also looked at the existing tools that the municipality has related to sort of land use planning. And we looked at the township's official plan, your zoning bylaw, and also your current site plan control bylaw. Sorry, let's move this out of the way. So to go into a little bit of detail, the Cannabis Act, just as a refresher, it regulates matters such as required notice to local authorities, physical and personal security, and production practices. It does permit both indoor and outdoor cultivation. It does only permit indoor storage and processing. It requires measures to prevent the escape of odors and pollen, and it requires physical and personal security measures, as well as where security barriers and physical barriers would be needed. The Municipal Guide talks and provides a sort of a guideline to various municipalities to sort of implement the pieces of legislation. It does allow municipalities permit within existing land use framework. So in the case of agriculture, it permits cultivation and processing. In the case of industrial, it permits processing. But it is up to the municipality to define that and implement it as you see fit. It does allow municipalities to restrict where these uses may be permitted and could be used permitted based on a special use permit, so a rezoning perhaps, or even a licensing framework, as the case may be. Again, we looked at the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, and the county Simcoe official plan. They are all silent on matters related to cannabis, just as a summary. And we gave or outlined a number of options for council's consideration in terms of changes to the official plan, zoning bylaw, and site plan control bylaw. So in the official plan, we identified a number of options, including adding definitions for cannabis uses, requiring mitigation for cannabis uses, that is sort of various studies or proof to be identified related to air quality, security, lighting, setbacks, etc. In the zoning bylaw, we suggested or outlined an option for adding a definition similar to the official plan. An option could be generally permitting cannabis cultivation and processing within the agricultural zone, and generally permitting cannabis processing and limited cultivation within the industrial zones. And within the site plan control bylaw, suggested an option could be requiring a demonstration of how a proponent's going to locate or what type of lighting, screening, landscape might be required or identified as part of the proposal, how access is going to be gained, how is parking going to be laid out, and how certain locations of infrastructure are going to be provided. So ventilation, as an example, could be done through site plan control. We also outlined sort of the best practices that we reviewed within 11 municipalities, 8 in Ontario, 2 in Alberta, 1 in Nova Scotia. And in summary, what they had undertaken was just by revising their zoning bylaw to include definitions, going through an official plan amendment to do something similar, adding definitions, use specific lot and building requirements for the proposed cannabis use, and also undertaking a licensing framework, which some had undertaken. You may recall, based on the discussion, we were asked to consider Clearview as a best practice study, and I'll report on that in the next couple of slides. It was asked that further research required regarding potential health impacts related to odor be undertaken, that the public survey questions be launched in September, and just a bit of a review of the best practices to determine their status. So in terms of the summary, now we're going to walk through the update, what we've done since the meeting in August. So as I mentioned, we were asked to look at Clearview, and the interim control bylaw was passed on the 5th for 1 year, and they are currently undertaking a study in related to land use planning policies related to cannabis operations. So they don't have anything proposed yet, but I suspect over the next 4 to 6 months, they'll certainly have something that'll come forward. As it relates to health impacts and mitigating odor, Public Health Ontario published a document called Odors from Cannabis Production. There have been no studies to date on the health effects associated with exposure to cannabis production. The current practices recommend appropriate ventilation and filtration systems for indoor cannabis production. And the brief did not provide specific measures for outdoor cannabis cultivation facilities, but a potential tool includes adopting a system to report and track odors, just to help with data and understand where some of the issues might be coming from. As you may be aware, we undertook some virtual public consultation in terms of a survey, and we've also proposed recommendations, which we'll walk you through. So the public survey was issued through SurveyMonkey that opened on August 31st, and it was open until October 5th. We got 166 responses, which is significant for, as you can imagine, for many planning assignments. We have found that having them virtual, having them online, we're actually getting a lot more input, which this is representative of. In summary, 53% of the survey respondents support cannabis and/or hemp production. The majority of the respondents believe cannabis should be regulated more than traditional agricultural uses and industrial uses. And the top 3 concerns, as we've seen pretty much in every municipality that we've done this work, odor is number 1, safety and security number 2, and property values is number 3. In terms just of some of the questions that we asked, which activity should be permitted within agricultural cannabis and hemp, indoor production and outdoor production were around the same. Processing with coming sort of third, manufacturing fourth, and then the other. I don't think we have what the other is, but they certainly felt that the other was something to be ranked.
Can we pause for a question, Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. If we could step back to to the survey slide while reviewing the original study. I just looking at the top 3 concerns there. These are the top 2, number 1 and 2. These are also legislative requirements put in place by the federal government, I think, on obtaining their license. Am I correct in assuming that then? Not necessarily responsibilities for a township?
Through your worship, that's correct, Councillor Cabral. It is part of the licensing, but municipalities can go a little bit further if they would desire.
Go ahead.
Back to the second question, which activity should be permitted within, wait a minute. Which activity should be permitted within industrial cannabis or hemp use? Indoor production was the first one, then along with processing, manufacturing, and outdoor production. What are the regulations you feel that Township of Springwater should put in place regarding cannabis or hemp production facilities? And the vast majority being security, and then setbacks from sensitive uses, setbacks from settlement areas. Generally speaking, those are the sort of the major findings of this. Certainly visual buffers, light pollution, appropriate signage are certainly ones that need to be considered as part of this, along with odor, but the vast majority being security being the largest concern. Sorry, I can't see. So in terms of the options and some of the recommendations that we're identifying, so for the official plan, cannabis cultivation being defined and considered as an agricultural use, which includes processing, where it is an agriculture-related use. It's generally in line with a lot of the other, the way a lot of other municipalities are managing this, and it is generally consistent with the findings and interpretation of the various pieces of legislation that we reviewed. Indoor cultivation being permitted as an industrial or agricultural use, only if, and where it's permitted indoors as an industrial use, it would need to accommodate a much smaller yield, include the processing of everything grown on site. The main reason for this is that you don't want to just start having indoor cultivation as a primary use in the agriculture or in the industrial or employment area. It can certainly detract from your provincially, identified employment lands, and we want to make sure that that's being maintained for those particular uses. And we're also suggesting that where it's going to be industrial, that it be determined on a case-by-case basis through a rezoning. It does give the municipality control to really understand where they should be and any particular other sort of revisions or setbacks that might be needed for those particular uses. Cannabis processing is independent from any growing operation, where cannabis processing is independent from any growing operation, it should be defined and considered as an industrial use. So if it's just solely processing, then it should only be in the industrial zone or in the industrial area. We're suggesting that your complete application requirements be updated to require a variety of different sort of elements. So a waste management plan, lighting, odor control, ventilation. And this is just also responding to Councillor Cabral's comment that while it is part of the federal licensing framework, the municipalities are permitted to at least demonstrate through site plan or through the application process how this is going to be managed. And just as a note too, we're suggesting that these uses be subject to site plan control, which gives the municipality that element of control to allow for them to demonstrate again how lighting is going to be managed, how parking or how traffic or access might be managed, as well as ventilation on the property.
Question, Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Actually, clarification if possible. In the report itself, there were a few terms used that are being used here again. I mean, I have no problem with cultivation, but we also talk about processing. I kind of can wrap my head around that, and production, which I think borders on cultivation. But there was also another term used, manufacturing. Would you be able to elaborate on that one, just to give me a better understanding of what the manufacturing, how that term is what it's describing?
Certainly, and through your worship to Councillor Cabral, it is probably ends up just being a language issue. They should all be meaning the same thing. So production, manufacturing, processing, processing and manufacturing would be the same thing. Production would mean anything from growing to the processing element as well. It's certainly something that I will take back, and we'll make sure it's cleaned up in the next version of the report.
Certainly, some of the examples that you used, that you studied and put in the report, do try to distinguish from the AMAFRA's interpretation about this being an agricultural product, specifically Oro Medonte. Definition of agricultural use and agricultural specialized has been amended to add the agricultural use specialized does not include a cannabis production and processing facility or outdoor growing of cannabis. And there are other municipalities that do that as well. So I know that there's dispute with AMAFRA, whether it's food and fiber or whether it is an agricultural product. And it's going back and forth in their arguments. So what would be wrong with, if anything, putting some sort of specific wording in a bylaw similar to what Oro's done?
That's a good question, Your Worship. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. The municipalities are able to do what they feel is appropriate. So for instance, if you want to have a site-specific zone that only allows cannabis as an example, the municipality is permitted to do that. If you want to have a separate process to follow, that's something that the municipality is certainly able to do. We felt that we would try and keep it try to keep your options as flexible as possible, without trying really to create a whole separate process for this. But we can certainly look at Oro Medonte in a bit more detail and certainly discuss that with staff. Happy to do that.
Thank you. Also, how many of the different locations that you looked at had cannabis production and growth, cultivation in just industrial areas as opposed to industrial or agricultural areas?
So, sorry, I want to replay the question back, Your Worship. So you're asking which ones had it just in industrial?
Yes, please.
The minority. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly which ones, but the vast majority were outside of the industrial area. We're trying to work with the comments that we received and perhaps some of the discussions we'd have with both yourselves, council, and staff, which is why we tried to provide some flexibility to allow it in the industrial area, provided it's not just being grown there.
Okay, Councillor Hanna.
Thank you, Mayor. I have your official plan review that you did for Springwater Township here in front of me, 143 pages. So when you talk about official plan amendment, would you be suggesting where, because I didn't find anything to do with cannabis in your report from 2018. Would you be, and obviously I think it's because we weren't worried about cannabis at that time. Would you be suggesting where in your official plan review the amendment would take place? And would you be providing us something in the way of an amendment to put in that official plan review that you prepared for Springwater Township in 2018?
Through your worship to Councillor Hanna, good question. It's something that I want to discuss actually with staff a little bit more to see what their desire is to have this implemented. I know that I think the intent is that we were to undertake the study and provide recommendations. If the intent from council and staff is to have us include that as part of our work on the official plan and writing that document for you, we can certainly do that. I'm just a little concerned on timing because I know your interim control bylaw certainly has a timeline identified with that, and I just want to make sure that your official plan amendment to support this would be done in a timely manner and not necessarily held up by any other particular official plan issue that might come up through the process. So I would want to defer that one to staff, and I can talk to them about that.
So the primary route initially to make any changes would be through bylaw changes and through the zoning bylaw amendment, which then would flow into the official plan eventually. Is that what you're suggesting?
Correct, Your Worship. I think there's sort of two paths that could be undertaken. One is have this document and have the official plan and zoning bylaw updated now to reflect the study, or to have this incorporated as part of the overall official plan project, which would not result in a zoning bylaw amendment. I think it's just in terms of logistics. If you're asking me, just given the timelines of the interim control bylaw, I might suggest that you undertake an official plan and a zoning bylaw amendment sort of after, once council is happy with the report, just given the timelines.
Director Spagnell?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just to provide a little bit more input into this, what staff had envisioned, because to Mr. Bender's comment about the interim control bylaw and the timing of that, staff is looking to potentially bring something forward in the new year, subject to the acceptance of the report, to start looking at implementing some of the recommendations within the report, similar to the secondary or the additional suites program that was expedited due to the importance and due to the timing of that. That is one avenue that staff can take to prepare separate official plan amendments and zoning bylaw amendments outside of the OP review, so that we can work within the 1 year time frame as mentioned by Mr. Bender. So we will be working on a work plan once we have any endorsement from council on the cannabis report.
Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just a comment here with respect to the bylaw or actually the official plan amendments. I know that we asked for a report. We also know there's several other municipalities who chose not to make any changes to their official plans. But I also want to keep in mind that cannabis, in particular recreational cannabis now, is a real employment opportunity. Up in Bruce County, it's the second largest employer there behind the Bruce Nuclear Generating Station. And we well know that it's the primary employer in Smiths Falls, where Canopy is, and hundreds and hundreds of people working there. And also out in Essex County, there's Afria employs 650 people. So I want to make sure that whatever we do also takes into consideration the benefits that these operations might also have. And I also want to try and make sure that we don't encroach on either provincial or federal legislation, because provincially, when it comes to, say, the odor, we have legislation in place through the province, the right to farm legislation. So there's a lot more, I think, in play here that unfortunately I didn't see some of these items related to in the initial study. So I do want council to be cognizant of the fact that there's more to this than just the study report that we have before us.
Yes, thank you. I'd also add that county is in the process of writing a letter of expressing its views to the Health Canada federally, and also the provincial bodies, MMAH and Department of Agriculture, with respect to the issues that it's finding in the different municipalities and considerations that Director Spagnell's been part of. That's in the process of being worked on. Go ahead, Mr. Bender.
Oh, thank you very much. So we went through the official plan amendment. Now we're going to go through some options for the zoning bylaw amendment. So again, similar to the official plan, talking about new definitions being added just to allow for that consistency between the two documents. Permitting cannabis cultivation as of right in the agricultural zone. Cannabis processing should be permitted as of right in the agricultural zone, provided it is associated with cultivation. So sort of almost like on-farm diversified or an ag-related use. Cannabis cultivation and processing should not be permitted as of right in the industrial zone. May be considered on a case-by-case basis, which I mentioned previously, through rezoning, depending on the scope and scale of the proposed facility. And then what you should also do is add regulations related to minimum lot area setbacks, separation distances. Again, some of the other items that directly respond to the survey that was the input that we received as part of the survey. So security, fencing, parking, and loading spaces as well. So we went through the.
Councillor Ritchie, go ahead.
you, Mayor Allen. I guess what the concern that I have is I'm a farmer and I cash crop, and I think that's the predominant choice of farming up in the whole county of Simcoe, at least in the north half, probably all of Simcoe County. So whether you take in Clearview, Tiny, Tay, Springwater, or Madani, cash cropping is very prominent. So I could see where, I could see where it's going to come where if you wanted to grow a crop and then harvest it, and I know there's a huge industrial manufacturing in Clearview Township there on the 12th of Sunnydale. So I guess in reality's sake, what are we looking at as a farmer in order to obtain and be able to grow this crop? I think, I'm sure I must be asking this question on behalf of a lot of farmers that would be asking the same thing. So I think that's something that needs to be kept in mind. So can you explain to me what the process of this is going to be?
Mr. Bender?
So through your worship to Councillor Ritchie, so just to ask it back, just to confirm, you're looking as if let's pretend it was you, Councillor Ritchie, that you wanted to grow cannabis as a cash crop on your property. That's what you're asking, what that process is? Okay. So bear with me, but I think it would go something like this. You'd still have to obtain a license federally to grow, and then provided your official plan and zoning bylaw are updated, you could really start going, provided you go through a site plan process, just to show if you have any parking, if you have anything related to that, where your security fencing is going to go, anything that would be proposed to support the growing of that particular crop.
Follow on?
Well, first off, I don't see where parking has a problem, an issue with, has anything to do with this. All I'm doing is growing the product. It's not any different. I understand it's cannabis. This year I grew corn. Next year I'll be beans. I rotate. If the farmers wanted to implement this into their crop rotation and try it, that's the whole point. I think I hope Director Spagnell's listening to this, because there's going to be a lot of farmers asking this question, and hopefully the policies are there that they can be implemented without a lot of problems. Of course, you need to get the license if and when you want to do it. Not to say that you're going to do it. It's just that, are we going to throw a mountain of red tape in front of this in order to obtain this? And that's something I want to throw out there right now as we go through this process, is so that if we chose to do it, if we chose to get the license, let's make it where it's reasonable, not where it's impossible. I think that's a fair statement to make. And I'm sure if I could fill this building full of farmers, they'd be asking the same things. I think going forward, we want to keep that in the front burner there. So, and Mr. Spagnell wants to add to that, please do so.
And I just, before Director Spagnell comments, and through your worship to Councillor Ritchie again, that's why we're suggesting that flexibility be added to, so a farmer would not have to go through an official plan amendment or rezoning to do this. I know some municipalities do not permit it as of right, and they require everyone to go through those particular processes, and we're suggesting that not be the case. And site plan control, I was just mentioning, as parking as an example, it might not apply at all. So that wouldn't necessarily be considered through that application. But my understanding is that fencing and security is required, and the municipality should have a say as to how that's being proposed.
Director Spagnell?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Councillor Ritchie. I think really, and as far as just to add to what Mr. Bender has provided, really the scale and the scope of what is required for each individual use really depends on how big of an operation we're talking about. And really the site plan control mechanism is used to prevent off-site impacts to maybe sensitive uses. And that's why we're suggesting site plan control and taking a look at parking and things of that nature. Of course, the main focus to Mr. Bender's comments is dealing with security, lighting, those types of things to try to reduce the impact to any neighboring property owners. So those types of considerations would go into any site plan process that we would entertain for these uses.
Councillor Ritchie, follow up?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Allen. And something to keep in mind too, again, going forward is the size. Like, you know, there's an outlay of money here. And that's not unknown to farming today. Like, I mean, so I'm going to put out a large amount of money. What's the minimum size acres? What's the maximum size acres? These are all things, maybe that's part of the license, but it should be considered while we're crafting this, some kind of a legislation going forward, looking at Oromadani or Clearview or any of them there. Like, I mean, we're all in the same boat here. So size matters, so that, you know, you can, going forward, something to consider, which would be very, very important. Thank you.
Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Echo a couple of points that Councillor Ritchie made. I just, from my standpoint, what I see in some ways is a bit of a duplication. The federal licensing aspect of it has security, has ventilation, odor mitigation as part and parcel to it. It should be up to the federal government to either supply the money, because I can see some costs associated to this with us going around and making sure all these things are in place. And if it's the federal licensing, then I would think a complaint to them would result in someone from a federal agency coming in and doing that inspection and either revoking the individual's license or not. But when it comes even to the farmers, to be quite frank, I then see the provincial government saying that it's a farming matter that sounds to me like they haven't really resolved that issue yet. In their mind, it's just another crop right now that requires a specific license to plant. And I can see if we put too many barriers in the way that we're going to go head to head with a farmer who's eventually going to say, don't care about your local policies. I'm following provincial and federal guidelines. So again, I guess based on what Councillor Ritchie brought up, I would like to ensure that with respect to the agricultural growing of it, that it happens. And I'm also curious right now if maybe through you, Mayor Allen, to Director Spagnol, this past summer, there was some low-grade hemp marijuana being grown, and I think Hempola Farms has done it. I'm not 100% certain, but I think they need a special license. I'm just curious whether or not they had to seek municipal permission to grow those specific crops, because there was acres and acres of it over here on Highway 27 that was taken down, and they were in the act of putting up some fencing. But that was because there were some misinformed individuals that kept coming out into the fields. It's low grade, very low grade marijuana. It actually doesn't even qualify because of the THC content as a controlled substance, but they still needed a license to grow it. And I'm just wondering, do we have something in place right now where they had to reach out to us and follow any guidelines or get permission to grow those crops?
Director Spagnol?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Councillor Cabral. I guess the first answer to one of your questions is rather simple, is that right now the township's bylaw and the township's documents do not speak to the growing of cannabis. So therefore, there wouldn't have been any direction within the existing policies or any of the existing provisions of the zoning bylaw to require them to come to the municipality to confirm the use. So, for example, you brought up Hempola Farms. It's my understanding that farm has been operating as, cropping hemp and harvesting hemp for quite some time. I would have to say in the order of probably 15 plus years or longer, because since I've been here, they've been in operation. So in that respect, there would be no requirement for them to come forward, which is why the moratorium was essentially set in place, was to take a look at the policies and the provisions to determine what process the municipality would like to see to try to manage these uses within the agricultural areas and the industrial areas. With respect to the property on County Road 27, that property has some specific considerations that due to the nature of enforcement and whatnot that I can't divulge. But basically any of the large scale facilities would require licensing from from the federal government, and that would have to be facilitated through that licensing process. But as far as any enforcement matters under the zoning bylaw and whatnot, I can't really get into any details on that because it's a matter of privacy.
Okay, Mr. Bender.
And just to follow up, Your Worship, to what Director Spagno was saying, and just through you to Councillor Cabral as well. I can see that the discussion is that we don't want to unnecessarily hinder any opportunities for farmers to grow a particular crop, in this case cannabis. And I will say that what we've found in many of the work that we've done throughout the province is that municipalities have found that they're just not well equipped to deal with issues that come up. And I'm not saying this is the case in Springwater, but certainly some constituents might call their councillor and they'll say, this is going on, I want you to do something about it. And they've not always had the best of response with saying, there's not much we can do, it's federally regulated, you have to deal with the federal government. And so a lot of municipalities have pivoted to try and at least deal with this in some way, shape, or form, so they have the tools available to try and help out their constituents. So if there's an issue with odor, at least you can say you went through a process to determine where certain ventilation might be. If there's issues with security, there we can say that, well, we went through a process to determine where that fencing should go, and that first of all, that it is appropriate, it does the job it needs to do, and it's not just an eyesore on neighboring property. And this is kind of why we're taking the work that we've done throughout the province and tried to sort of scope it and shape it in a way that's appropriate for Springwater, because some of the things that we've seen and heard throughout the province, and that's kind of why we're recommending what we're recommending. If it's council's decision that we find that we don't have those issues, or we don't think we're going to have those issues, then this might be a bit too aggressive, and that's the whole point of having this discussion today, because we want to understand, does this make sense?
Follow up, please, Mayor Allen.
Go ahead.
It does make sense in some areas, such as we're talking about the trespassing of lighting, those types of things, maybe some of the setbacks. But when it comes to the fencing, the security aspects of it, the odor aspects of it, which are going to have to be adhered to by conditions set by the federal government when they issue that license is what's important to these people. And they will do what is necessary to hold on to that license. So the way I kind of see it is, rather than have our staff and our people utilizing necessarily their time to enforce some legislation or do some inspections that really are federal in nature, it'd be easy enough to say, we've got an issue here, contact the federal government, let them know what it is, and have them send someone out there. Because at the end of the day, these folks want to keep their license. And if they don't adhere and address the complaints, then what's going to happen is federal government's going to suspend it or pull it. So in my way of thinking, it's kind of like driving a taxi cab. If you don't adhere to the rules that were set out when you applied for your license, they're going to suspend it and you're not going to be making any money anymore. So I just kind of want to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a position where we're trying to create a bylaw that basically duplicates what's already in place when these folks get their license, because then I think it puts us in a position where now we're the ones who have to police it on a regular basis. We're the ones that have to use our resources to do that. And I think we need to be very careful that that's not what we do, although we should have something in place, a process to make the federal government responsible for the licenses that they issue. Springwater's not issuing these licenses, the federal government is. So that's kind of what I want to make sure when we move forward on this, that it addresses the problems that we're actually going to have, not for us to simply duplicate something that then we have to turn around and spend time and money enforcing. So I just want to be careful on that particular point. Thank you.
But Mr. Bender, have you not found in your study of other municipalities that if they're with the odor problems that do arise, that the complaints come straight to the municipality and the federal government has not been enforcing the matter as much as what Councillor Cabral might be referring to?
Thank you, Your Worship. That's exactly the case. What we found, I know in other municipalities, we've been working directly with them where, we've had public meeting people, like 200-300 people have come out saying that they just can't bear the smell. and that, the various complaints to the municipality have been, there's not much the municipality can do because they didn't have the framework in place, and the federal government had not been responsive, at least in the timelines that people might want. I'm sure you can appreciate if there's an issue, people want answers now, they want it resolved now. And just, I can't speak for the federal government, but they were not at the time staffed to investigate every single complaint in one municipality, let alone ones across the country.
Okay, continue, Mr. Bender.
Okay. And again, just recognizing this discussion we just had, I wanted to identify some newer existing tools that the municipality has as an option to help regulate this. Again, having a nuisance bylaw to regulate, again, any odor, light, noise from facilities. And again, with all of these, there are fines and penalties that the municipality can identify to, again, just to ensure that people are doing what they need to be doing as part of a cannabis operation. As part of a property standards bylaw, again, it's just another option for the municipality to consider as it relates to light and noise. And then we also have revisions to a site plan control bylaw, which we've talked about, to include requirements for lighting and screening and landscaping access, just to ensure that people do what they say they're planning to do. And we also are suggesting that the site plan control bylaw be amended to apply to cannabis production facilities within the agricultural zone, because currently it does not apply to the agricultural zone. And that's the end of the presentation. So I'm happy, Your Worship, to continue the discussion, to answer any questions as council would like.
Okay, thank you. Can I get a mover and seconder to receive this report? And then we'll have any further discussion, please. Councillor Moore. Any other cards? Councillor Ma, thank you. Further questions? Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just a couple more points I'd like to speak on in particular, and I'm getting back to the farmers again. When it comes to odors from an agricultural entity such as a farm, the province already has right to farm legislation in there that has a mechanism that is specific to dealing with farming. So down the road, I can see us having an issue with that. I do suspect, however, that the majority of odor complaints, and certainly Mr. Bender can answer this, I guess, would be from facilities where they're actually processing the plant material, not necessarily the cultivation. So that would be one. The other one I'm trying to wrap my head around is the taxation aspect. If we have some cultivation going on in an industrial setting, zoned, there's a different tax rate applied to that than there would be to a farm that would be basically engaged in the cultivation of marijuana as well. And then again, if a farm is doing marijuana, they kind of have almost an inherent ability to take it from the ground right through to the finished product, as they do with many agricultural products on a farm too. So I guess those are just a couple of points that I would like to have. It's a big question is still what I'm saying. And that's why I'm hesitant to just take the report as it is.
So what is the specific question then, Councillor Cabral?
Well, I would like to know from maybe Director Spagnol if there's any kind of a plan in place to try and find out about the taxation aspect of it. Industrial land, if I'm not mistaken, is taxed at a different rate than farmland, yet both of them will be in a position to grow the crop and process the crop.
Okay, Director Spagnol.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through to Councillor Cabral. I think that's something that we will have to take back and take a look at from a taxation standpoint as to how MPAC may deal with taxation for the agricultural properties when we're talking about processing and the cropping of cannabis. The one thing I'd like to point out is that as far as receiving the report, Council will not be receiving the report today. This was intended just to provide an outline of what is in the report and some of the key findings and recommendations. So the expectation will be that the questions that are posed by council will be addressed through a staff report and potentially addressed through any revisions to the existing report to eventually be submitted to council for acceptance. So really, this is a touch point to receive council's questions and comments in order for us to take it back and provide you with the necessary information so that council is comfortable to make a decision to accept and endorse the findings of the report. So we will look into that further, Councillor Cabral.
Okay. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Councillor Cabral touched on a very important issue there about taxation on the industrial park, because I know a number of years ago in our previous provincial government, we came up and they were circling the wagons about taxing, making maple syrup operations an industrial use and going to a taxation that. And it ended up getting squashed. Any of these guys had to go out and tap trees and tramp through 3 feet of snow in order to see how maple syrup was made. Be sure as hell take a second look, which they did. And that's a concern that I have. I can see down the road where if somebody wanted to manufacture it, like process it and sell it, like market gardening or whatever, abide by all the rules. I can't see any reason or why not that can't be done. And this industrial, that's something to keep in mind going forward, that it doesn't get slapped with a heavy tax that will in turn scare an investment out of the township. And I don't want that. And I'm sure there's other councillors feel the same way too. Thank you. If anybody wants to add to that, please jump in. Thanks.
Councillor Hanna.
Thank you, Mayor, and I guess through you to Director Spagno. When we first were asked to support this consultant's review of the cannabis, I believe there was an argument that there was funding available from the province to pay for it. So my question to you, if that is correct, maybe we're not going to be talking about this today, but I would just like to know if there was funding available, did it actually cover the review that was done by WSP? And if not, what would we be doing in the future in order with that funding in order to help pay for some of the things that were identified in the study that we have to do to create a bylaw and so on?
Director or CAO Schmidt. Or CAO Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the township did receive funds from the Cannabis Implementation Fund, approximately just under $30,000, which some of these funds could go towards this study, as well as could be used for future purposes. With regards to the taxation component too, I will reach out to colleagues in other municipalities, such as Bradford and Clearview, to see whether or not we can get some further information on the taxation piece. Again, assessment is dictated by MPAC, and so MPAC will determine whether or not how the property is assessed, and from there, taxation rates will be applied accordingly. But to give a little bit clearer information and maybe a little more specific information, I'll reach out to my other colleagues and see what I can report back on.
Thank you. Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just on that particular point, I know MPAC plays a significant role, obviously, in assessing property for the value as far as taxation is concerned. But is it not, two questions here, Mayor Allen, just so we know up front. Is it not the township that decides on the percentage point based on the zoning? And if that's the case, then MPAC would be applying that percentage to the value based on the zoning that the township put in place in the first place. So I would suggest that township may very well have a role to play here beyond what MPAC plays. So that's why I see it more as not necessarily just MPAC, but maybe we need to see what other municipalities are doing as far as the zoning is concerned. Because I mean, one year they grow marijuana, you can't really rezone them for that. And then the next year they're back, growing corn, so that's the one comment there. The other one is I want to turn just for a moment to the agricultural, agritourism business. We have Rounds Ranch right here in Springwater, and there are lots of cottage industries, cideries, there's vineyards and whatnot. And I'm going to look down the crystal ball a little bit here, and I'd suggest that there might be an opportunity down the road for some marijuana production area to do as some of the breweries and some of the wineries do, have an area where people could smoke their product and enjoy different kinds of it. And it would actually be almost like doing a wine tour. I know it sounds crazy to us because maybe we're not that generation. But the new people now who are in their 20s and that, give it another 10 years, I don't think it's so far-fetched to see something like that happening down the road too.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? So Clerk Ainsworth, there is a recommendation here. Can you clarify what we're doing here, please?
Thank you through you, Mayor Allen. The recommendation is strictly to receive the presentation that was made
Yes,
today.
that's what. So we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you, Mr. Bender. And I'll now call upon Brad Post and Matt Alexander and John Tassopoulos from WSP to provide council with a presentation on the official plan review.
Thank you, Worship. It's actually, unfortunately, you have to listen to me again at the outset. I will introduce the project, give you a bit of a synopsis as to where we are, and then I'll turn it over to Brad to talk about the population serving employment study, then the intensification strategy, and then the corridor study. So if I can ask Matt to share his screen, if you have the ability to do so, we can get that presentation going. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So what I want to do is walk you through, again, what the purpose of this conversation is today, give you a bit of an overview, and then walk you through the three studies, concluding with next steps, and then obviously questions and discussions. And as I mentioned before, Your Worship, we're happy to entertain questions throughout the presentation. If those of you who want to wait until the end of each segment, then you're welcome to do so, but just feel free. Next slide, please. And again, this meeting today is really to provide you with an update on the process to ensure that you are engaged in the process and to identify how yourselves, council, members of the public, and stakeholders will be involved in the process as it rolls out over the next number of months. Slide, thanks. So you may recall as part of phase one, there was a number of documents, a number of steps, and other milestones that were completed. There was a communication strategy, there were visioning workshops that were done to, again, obtain input from the public and stakeholders and council to help shape this assignment that we're working on right now. There was a growth management strategy, which was brought up by Councillor Hanna previously. There's also a draft discussion paper that talked about, the various issues, the various policies that would need to be considered as part of the new official plan. There was a public open house. There was a Section 26 meeting back in December of last year that walked through, again, the various changes that were needed as part of the official plan, and to really just provide that process-related meeting that is required under the Planning Act. Now we're in phase two, and we're in the midst of sort of the background reports, the various studies that we have been preparing over the last number of months. That relates to the population-related employment strategy, intensification strategy, and the Bayfield corridor study. So the intent is that, and I'll talk about this a little bit near the end of the presentation. The intent is that we're going to present highlights this afternoon, and to get some input from you to answer any questions that you have, because the intent is that we would revise anything that we need to revise based on the conversation today, and then move forward to meet with stakeholders and the public in the new year. Once we get all that input, we will revise the reports and then prepare the draft official plan, which would then move forward to a public open house. Again, meeting with council to discuss the changes that are needed, revise the official plan, and then have a statutory public meeting, and then ultimately council adoption, which would then allow the document to be forwarded off to the county for approval. Next slide, please. Oh, and that's it. You don't have to hear from me for a little bit now. I'm going to turn this over to Brad Post from Watson & Associates, and he's going to walk you through the population-related employment market study.
Great, thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, I'm Brad Post. I'm a senior consultant with Watson & Associates, and thank you for having me here today to present the findings of the population-related employment market study. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the study is really to identify if there are enough designated lands to accommodate commercial and institutional growth in Springwater to 2031. The report includes details on the types of institutional and commercial uses required over the forecast horizon based on population growth to 2031. While the report primarily assesses the demand based on population growth to 2031, the report does provide some direction beyond 2031 with the magnitude of commercial growth that can be expected more long-term, i.e. Beyond 2031. And this is based on the anticipated build out of the Midhurst secondary plan area as well as greenfield areas. Next slide, please. So what is population-related employment? Well, population-related employment includes a wide range of employment uses intended to serve the local population and surrounding area, as well as visitors from outside the local area. Now, this represents about 75% of the township's existing employment base. The remaining 25% of the township's employment base includes sectors related to industrial or employment lands, as well as rural-based employment such as agriculture and aggregate industries. So population-related employment essentially serves the local trade and tourism, while industrial or employment lands employment serves a large portion of the export-based economy. So when I say population-related employment lands or PRE lands, for the purpose of this study, I'm referring to the lands designated in the township's official plan as mixed-use, commercial, or institutional. Next slide, please. So why is it important to plan for PRE uses? Well, PRE uses provide an important component in building complete communities by providing residents access to retail goods and services. As previously mentioned, it's also the largest employment sector of the local employment base in Springwater. And there's also the opportunity to use planning policies to direct PRE demand to strategic growth areas, including intensification areas. Next slide, please. The number one factor in assessing the demand for PRE uses is population growth. Population growth, as well as average household income, is utilized using a model to determine the market potential against provincial data. However, there are some other market considerations that we have to look at a local context. And then this slide and the next slide summarize those local context market considerations. So one of the interesting things is that only 15% of employed Springwater residents actually commute to jobs within the township of Springwater. The majority are commuting to the city of Barrie, and these residents are influenced by commercial options on the way to work, as well as commercial options near their place of work. But the interesting thing is, on the other hand, about 60% of jobs within the township are actually held by residents that live in other municipalities. So what this means is there's an opportunity to serve those inflow commuters as well. The Allenville settlement area plays an important role, not just for Allenville, but also for beyond the urban settlement area, and actually acts as a service center for the southern portion of Tiny Township, as well as the tourism in the local area. The other interesting thing is that the Midhurst settlement area compared to comparable communities. So we looked at a number of communities across Ontario with the same characteristics as Midhurst. So comparable population and proximity to a larger urban center like Barrie. Midhurst has a very low amount of retail and service space relative to its population. So it's very underserved right now. There's not really much of a commercial base there in Midhurst right now. And as noted, a reality is that the city of Barrie is in proximity to the Midhurst urban settlement area, and it's very easy to get to. So next slide, please. So one of the stats that might alarm us is the vacancy rate is at 17% within the township. Is there a question?
Yes, there is. Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and through you to Mr. Post. First, a bit of an observation. I don't know how old this particular slide is, Mr. Post, but one of the things, being a resident in this area for 30 years, well, more than 30 years, Elmvale has very much changed. And what has changed is the retail aspect of the village itself. Has become blended to more of, which used to attract a lot more people from outside that were coming to spend their money when they just happened to be passing through town and whatnot. There were a few more restaurants, and although there are some new businesses in town, and you know, some of the chain stores like Tim Hortons and Subway and McDonald's have opened up, the main street there over the years has kind of degraded itself from the retail aspect, and now there's more in the way of what you might call service delivery models there, chiropractor, sports medicine, rehabilitation area, a laundromat, the type of thing that people would be coming into town specifically to utilize the services, as opposed to being in town as a retail shopper, i.e. visitor or someone from just outside of town. And I'm just wondering, when we're talking about changing the model, do you envision down the road more retail or the same type of a mix? It's just that I don't see the services themselves bringing a lot of people into town just for a visit and a bit of shopping. That's my one concern there. And the other concern is with respect to Elmvale, once again, itself. The actual commercial areas are getting to the point where they are depleted. And I noticed that in your presentation, and I might be getting ahead of it just a little bit, we have to restrain ourselves to inside the red zone. And I'm wondering, is that something that the county drives solely by itself, or is there opportunity from a municipal standpoint to look at the settlement area for Elmvale and extend it outside, southbound on 27, say to the 8th, where we have a substantial business entity there, the hardware lumber store, and obviously 27 would continue to remain a commercial area for further development down the road. I'm just wondering if you might be able to provide some insight on that, whether it would be possible or not.
I'll go to Mr. Post and then Director Spagnell.
Great, thank you, Councillor. So I think your first question was with respect to the amount of service space within Elmvale, and your observation is that there seems to be more service space opening up in Elmvale, and that trend seems to be, and that seems to be something that's likely to continue to happen. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is a national trend, really, is that we're seeing more growth in health and medical and those type of professional services. It's a lot of the we're seeing a lot of retail plazas, including a broader mix of uses, including medical, healthcare. Going forward, we know that e-commerce is going to have an impact, but there's still the opportunity to have more experience-based retail, so like restaurants and those sorts of things. But services are definitely becoming a growing component of the commercial base, and that is definitely a factor that was put into this this analysis. With respect to your second question, Councillor, you were wondering about the urban the potential to change the urban settlement area boundary within Elmvale.
Yeah, with respect to the village itself, I mean, the residential, there's probably still some capacity there, I believe, and Director Spagnell would know better than I would. However, I do know that the commercial strips for the retail and the services and that are getting kind of gobbled up. And I was just wondering whether or not the idea of a settlement area is that driven, because I got the sense that it was driven by the county that determined what the settlement area would be, or whether that's something that at the municipal level, we could say that we would like to see the settlement area expanded southbound, say, and I'm just using the 8th as an example because there is a large commercial retailer there, the hardware lumber lumber store, whether or not that's something that could be driven from the municipal level to then have more commercial capacity southbound, and even also possibly more capacity for residential within the village.
Right. I think, well, the main conclusion of the study was really that there is enough designated land within Elmville and Midhurst. So I think what you're noting, Councillor, is that maybe it's not in the right location. Maybe that's your observation, that there isn't enough designated land along the highway.
I'll just let Director Spagnell weigh in, because I know he knows the issue, and so go ahead, Director Spagnell.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Really, the issue is that what the municipality has to demonstrate in order to take a look at a settlement area expansion is it needs to take a look at the amount of land required to meet its targets for residential uses. And in essence, just as a bare minimum, the determination has to go forward to say that there's a shortage in land to provide for residential development. Based on the work that's been completed through the growth management strategy, it's been indicated that there is sufficient lands designated for residential development to provide for the township's development horizons over to 2031 in the next 20 years. So as part of the official plan review process, settlement area boundaries have not been considered because it's been determined that there's enough land designated to support population growth and to support any future residential development within the existing settlement area boundaries as they are drawn up as right now. When we're talking about the related employment market study, what it's doing is taking a look at how much employment lands are provided for and how much is needed to support that population that we see moving forward over the next 20 to 30 years. So in essence, it's really to make sure that we have enough commercial serving employment, or enough commercial serving or population serving commercial uses to support the population that we have coming forward.
Great, thank you. So as I noted, one of the issues for the township is that the township has a high vacancy rate of approximately 17%. Now, a healthy vacancy rate in a balanced market is typically between 5 and 10%. But it's important to note that we also reviewed the vacant space. Just looking at the percentage isn't enough. So we looked at the vacant space, and which included a review of the range of vacant space, the quality of vacant space. And based on our assessment of the vacant built space, it's more of a concern within Elmville than it is in Midhurst, even though the vacancy rates are comparable in both urban settlement areas. Next slide, please. So in order to accommodate population-related employment growth to 2031, the township needs about 60 hectares of designated PRE lands to 2031. It is anticipated, so just looking at the commercial space alone, it's anticipated that by 2031, about 286,000 square feet of new space is required within the Midhurst urban settlement area. Now, just to give you a rough idea of what 286,000 square feet looks like, it's about roughly the size of two large home improvement stores like Home Depot. So this 286,000 square feet would accommodate a range of retail and commercial uses, including food store space like grocery stores, services, and some general merchandise space in a range of store sizes. With respect to Elmville, the demand is about 62,000 square feet. So this is just a rough idea. This is slightly larger than a mid-sized grocery store, so like a Sobeys or a Metro. Next slide, please.
Question, Councillor Ritchie.
So the 62,000 square feet, do we have that space to accommodate now?
Yes, yes, Councillor Ritchie. The township has enough designated land to accommodate the 62,000 square feet.
Where?
Where within the urban settlement area of Allenville, we do have.
Can you point that out within the settlement area of Elmvale?
Pardon, Councillor?
Can you
He's
point that out?
asking where in Elmville.
Elmvale? What's that, Mr. Allen?
And maybe I'll turn it over to Director Spagnell to expand.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I think what needs to be clarified here is that when we speak to commercial space, we're speaking about lands available to be able to support that commercial space. So you might not necessarily have the building square footage in place, but we have the lands available to be able to support that amount of square footage. So it's not existing building, there's available lands to be able to support 62,000 square feet of commercial space.
Follow on.
And my question is very simple. Where in Elmvale can you place that amount of building?
Director Spagnell.
Yeah, Mayor Allen, there is opportunities along the Queen Street frontages where you've got some commercial designations that are in place along there, where you might have some land holdings that are rather large, which aren't fully being utilized to their maximum potential. There are scattered properties in Elmville where you have commercial uses, again, that are not maxed out and may not use the lands efficiently. And so it's based on a look at those vacant lands, and it's a look at the existing commercial uses in the settlement area that number is derived from. So
Councilor
for example,
Sorry, thank you, Mayor Allen. Just a comment on that. Basically, this number of 62,000 square feet is actually a restriction on a number of potential commercial or retail enterprises in Elmville, because if it equates to a medium-sized Sobeys store, that would be a medium-sized Sobeys store that the meat department would be on Queen Street, the dairy department would be on Yonge Street, and the sundries and canned goods would be somewhere else down the street on Yonge Street too. So based on what Councillor Ritchie said and my comments earlier, I really do think that as far as the retail and commercial space in Elmville is concerned, yes, there is retail and commercial space in Elmville, but it does certainly limit and restrict the number of types of retail that might be or be put in place or become available. So I'm still going back to that whole deal about sliding down 27. It would be something that I think would be something to consider.
Director Spagnell.
thank you, Mayor Allen. I think, I think the determination as to the available square footage for commercial space, it really lies around what lands are available within the settlement area, what exists from a designation standpoint. And, as far as a limiting factor, I mean, this is a forecast, and this is an analysis that was conducted by Watson, who's taking a look at, based on the population, what is required. So it is Watson's forecast and Watson's calculation that's stating that there would be the requirement that there's enough retail space at 62,000 square feet to support the population that is forecasted to be in Elmville over the timeframes that we're dealing with here. So, from an expansion of commercial land standpoint, I believe what the recommendation here is that we maintain what we have in place right now, monitor it as growth comes on stream, and then take a look at it again to make sure that there is enough commercial space there to support the residential population that is slated to come in Elmville.
Just a quick follow-up question, Mayor Allen.
Yes.
What is our anticipated or population in Elmville, the village of Elmville, come 2031?
Director Spagnell.
Let me just think, just doing a little bit of rough math here. I'm just trying to think of the subdivisions that we have slated, and just with simple math, there could be an additional 600 units that come on stream, and that's being conservative. So it could be another 1,800 people.
So
And that doesn't, now just to clarify, that doesn't pick up any of the vacant lands, say for example, the Wye River Estate property. That doesn't pick up any intensification with any underutilized lands. So again, that's a very rough estimate of where we could be. But there's a lot of planning and there's a lot of things that could happen within the settlement area that could push that number up.
well, I'm just looking right now, it's going to be roughly around 4,000 people as a ballpark figure with the potential to be higher. So I'm just wanted to get a feel for that. Thank you.
Councillor Moore, then Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I'm just curious with the shift out of using commercial space to e-commerce, if these calculations were based on sort of old math or new math that has occurred over the last 6 months, and if that's something that will be incorporated in our market study going forward, because this information might be outdated already.
Mr. Post?
That's a great question, Councillor Moore. So the data is based on, so our data has been informed by provincial data as of the end of 2018, 2019. Certainly there's been a lot of news going on about retail space with COVID impacts, and the thing to recognize is that we really don't know what's going to happen in the next few years with this impact. We know that COVID's really just accelerated e-commerce. So the analysis does take into account trends in e-commerce. We've looked at e-commerce trends over the past few years. Is increased right now. E-commerce accounts for offhand, I believe it's just under 5% of retail sales. Obviously, a lot higher right now because of COVID, but we do see we did account for that and an increase in e-commerce sales going forward.
Councillor Ritchie?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I find those numbers that 600 to be a little high. I stand to be corrected, but I find that to be high but to just reiterate what Councillor Cabral is saying, I agree. And this isn't something that Director Spagnell has not heard from me over the years as a councillor about the need about moving down to the 8th to incorporate more room that we need. We just experienced that with the seniors residents. We had to sign a minister zoning order in order for them to move outside that. And that's a discussion all of its own. If you look at the master recreation plan for the arena, there's about 20 years left for the arena in Elmvale. And after that, we'll be looking for more room. Well, you know what? The south end of Elmvale would be a perfect place for that if we chose to do it. And by then, who's to say we could do with 2 arenas? We probably could do with 2 arenas right now without worrying about the recplex and what goes on down in Midhurst. So it just seems to point more and more about moving that boundary line. There's a business on the south end, the Home Building Center would love to expand, can't do it. And yes, he needs to step forward, but it just seems like it falls on deaf ears, and I'm not a happy counselor for that. I'll just be honest with you, Mayor Allen, you promised a lot of things, and I don't see any of this happening here. Whether it come from me, whether it come from Councillor Camaro, I can fill this building that I'm in right now full of people saying the same thing. And I don't need to have somebody sit and say, well, I seen a study. I don't want to know about studies. I want to move the line.
Okay.
I want to be able to accommodate these people.
Okay, thank you. Okay, proceed, Mr. Post.
Next slide, please. So we just talked about the population-related employment land demand. So now we're talking about the land needs. So basically, based on the review of the existing vacant supply against the demand, there is enough designated land to support the PRE demand for Midhurst and Elmvale to 2031. Beyond 2031, our analysis indicates the township will likely have enough designated PRE lands to accommodate the growth anticipated within the Midhurst secondary plan area and other greenfield areas. So what this means is the township does not need to designate additional lands for PRE uses to 2031. The township is recommended to maintain its existing supply of designated PRE lands. Further, a key finding of the report is that there is significant demand for commercial development to 2031. Going forward, the township will need to ensure that planning policies leverage the commercial demand as an opportunity to direct growth to strategic growth areas, including intensification areas. I'm happy to take additional questions. That concludes my portion of the presentation.
Okay, I'm not seeing any, so let's continue, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Brad. Thank you, Mayor Allen.
Oh, there came a card. So Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I'm sorry about that. I was reaching for it as you were talking. I'm just curious through you to, I'm sorry, I forget the gentleman's name.
Brad Post?
Yes, Mr. Post. Just with respect to the Midhurst area, I know that there are a couple of retail outlets within the Midhurst Village itself, over at Doran Road and Finley Mills Road. I'm just wondering if in any of these plans, is there any other commercial or retail areas within Midhurst itself on St. Vince or something? I'm just not familiar. Are they all on Finley Mills Road and Highway 26 Bayfield Street?
Mr. Post?
Thank you, Councillor. To be honest, I don't know offhand. I do believe there are a couple. There are some sites within the Midhurst secondary plan area. This might be a good question for Director Spangle to discuss.
Director Spagnell?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through to Councillor Cabral. What this takes into account is existing designations. So there's a considerable amount of land that's designated for mixed-use commercial along the Bayfield Street corridor. In addition to that, there's also some lands of significant depth, being the Curry property, which also has commercial designations as well. As far as along the Finley Mill corridor, probably running east along Finley Mill, you might have the commercial mixed-use designation running about 4 or 5 properties along that street, if that. But primarily it's along the Bayfield Street corridor. And again, the property of significance would be the Curry property, which has some significant depth and area to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Spagnell.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Matt Alexander. I'm with WSP, and I'll discuss the intensification strategy. The purpose and objectives of the draft intensification strategy that we've prepared is to confirm the residential intensification opportunities that exist within the township to meet the requirements of the County of Simcoe official plan. And this includes identifying strategic growth areas, investigating the ability of the township to service and facilitate development of those strategic growth areas, support opportunities for intensification in a general sense throughout the municipality, and determine general policies, principles, and concepts for massing and urban design within intensification areas in order to facilitate that growth. And also to assist with community engagement to better understand the shift, to help people better understand the shift to a more compact built form, the reasons for doing it, adding a more diverse range and mix of housing options, resulting from achieving higher rates of intensification. And keeping that in mind, 15%, the intensification target for the municipality is 15% established by the current Simcoe County official plan. This does not include lands outside of the built boundary. And in this case, currently what we're looking at is the 2 types of built boundaries that I'll talk about in a moment. But shown on this slide, you see the red line, which is the existing delineated built boundaries for Elmvale and Midhurst. Moving forward, the township will only be able to direct intensification towards the red areas in order to contribute towards that intensification target. And any changes to the target, that 15% target, or to population allocation for the township will be driven by the county municipal comprehensive review, which will of course be done in in consultation with the township. So that's your opportunity to start talking about changes to population allocation or intensification targets. So we want to show this visually. This map shows the number of new residential units that could be accommodated on lands designated for residential development throughout the township. So this is the south portion, and the next slide shows the north portion. The areas outlined in yellow are considered undelineated built boundaries for the purposes of the growth plan, which gives the direction on intensification targets. The red areas, as I just mentioned, are the delineated built boundaries. So currently, well, and to give you a summary of the numbers, so Center Vespra has room for 199 units right now on lands that are designated for residential use. Snow Valley has 195 and Midhurst has 24. Minnesang does not have any additional lands. So currently, new development within both the yellow and red areas can be counted towards that 15% intensification target that's required in the current county official plan. But under the new growth plan, once that's implemented through the county MCR, only the red areas will be able to be counted towards the intensification target. And so that's why you see there's a bit of an issue with Midhurst in particular, where we only have room for 24 units currently. And you see a very similar image with the north side. Elmvale has room for 47 units, Phelpston 23, Anton Mills 109, and Hillsdale 609. So as you can see, currently, there's a much greater supply of designated lands within the undelineated areas compared to the delineated areas. And that's generally fine. So there's nothing that we would be proposing that would prevent those lands from being developed in the future. But for the purposes of meeting those intensification targets, more development and intensification needs to be directed into those delineated built boundaries, the red outline. So the purpose of the intensification strategy is to help increase the supply of land within Elmvale and Midhurst so that the township is prepared to meet that intensification target that will sort of be brought down from the growth plan, implemented through the new county official plan once that comes into effect. So this gives you a breakdown of what the numbers are and what we're looking at. So the 2018 growth management strategy projects a need to accommodate approximately 777 units through intensification, specifically through intensification to 2031. Within the delineated built boundaries, so Elmvale and Midhurst, the township has supply for 77 units currently. The additional residential units program, so secondary suites, can assist in increasing that supply depending on the take-up and where that's located. The intensification strategy identifies Midhurst as the focus for providing an additional supply of 700 units based on the servicing capacity, the land availability, so that's taking into consideration vacant and underutilized lands, strategic growth location in the near region, and being able to implement growth plan direction and anticipate needs identified by the county MCR. And so that's basically the basis for the Bayfield corridor. And these are our key takeaways. So essentially, given that we need to direct more intensification within Elmvale and Midhurst, we have identified Midhurst as the preferred location for most of that intensification, and specifically the Bayfield corridor to accommodate that growth. So it does not currently have lands designated for residential development to accommodate that. And that's what the Bayfield corridor study is meant to address, how to do it. So the key takeaways for the intensification strategy include establishing policies that encourage and facilitate gentle intensification through the redevelopment of existing low density properties. So that'd be something like converting existing single detached lots into maybe 2 single detached lots, or a small townhouse development or semi-detached, something like that. Also to establish policies to provide a framework for the division of estate residential lots where they exist within settlement areas and where they can be serviced. And it's something that you see in other communities, estate residential development that is getting on in years and has opportunities for additional land division. And we're also recommending an update to the policies of the Midhurst transitional residential designation to permit a greater variety of housing types rather than only single detached dwellings. And we've also identified the potential to provide financial or regulatory incentives for intensification. And that can be something like reducing development charges for certain types, or eliminating development charges for certain types of development in specific areas, or reducing other regulatory roadblocks that can get in the way. And I believe that's my last slide, but I suppose we can take some questions if there are any for this section. I hope that helps to address some of the questions that came up earlier.
Okay, let's proceed with the next session, please.
Sounds good. We'll pass along to John Tasiopoulos.
Good afternoon, Mayor Allen and councilors. There's a lot to consume here today, and I hope I won't add too much more to it, but that it'll actually be showing how all these things come together, especially where Matt left off with respect to where does intensification go? What's a good way to accommodate it within Midhurst, and how do we accommodate it on Bayfield itself? So we're sort of going from the macro and getting right into a closer demonstration and a framework on the corridor. So Matt, can you just get to the next? So what were the purpose and objectives? I mean, the idea was that we wanted to start to think about how the major intersection at Bayfield and Snow Valley and Finley Mill Roads, how they were going to establish a community focus that supports the envisioned community hub on the Hasty Tract property. It also was, in a broader sense, an opportunity to identify land uses that would be appropriate for a higher order community focus area. It was meant to also establish where are these developable lands along the Bayfield corridor, and identify general time horizons in order to achieve the vision for the corridor, which, because of its length, I mean, it's almost 4 kilometers when we're looking at it within Midhurst. It's we start to think about, well, where does the focus go? I already mentioned that intersection, and how do you build upon it, and what comes after that? So that's going to be kind of important to consider in terms of how phasing works. And of course, with respect, just so I can sort of finish off the slide, the overall idea, even the envisioning of the Midhurst secondary plan, was always to accommodate a mix of retail and commercial and residential uses that were scaled more to a pedestrian level. We weren't looking at these big box type of development. We're thinking of it more in terms of how could this become a finer grained experience there. You can actually have pedestrians and cyclists, and that there'd be a more urban section rather than just a 4-lane highway that currently exists for the extent of Midhurst there. And finally, just looking at how do we establish appropriate intensification along the corridor. I'm going to be demonstrating something that's very modest. So the point being that I always like to take a more conservative approach to make sure that we know, even in a more conservative approach, we can get to certain numbers, we can get to certain intensification, and that if we actually build more, we can actually get to a higher number. And then also the idea was also when we do include development along Bayfield, how do we ensure that we're balancing 2 things? One is we're allowing for access for vehicles, but we're limiting the number of interruptions, yet still trying to create something that's going to work for the people that are eventually going to live there, and for pedestrians that may use the corridor. So we have to envision Bayfield in a different way, moving into the future. And we're not talking for the next 5-10 years, but in the next 30 to 40 years, how we're thinking about it. And then finally, there were guidelines that were already prepared for the Midhurst secondary plan. What would be very important is, in order to move forward with the envisioned mixed-use corridor, is to start to establish some further refined guidelines that take us that help give some direction on how development could occur on the corridor itself from an aesthetic point of view. Next slide, man. So the existing condition as we have it now in the secondary plan, because there is a difference between the secondary plan and zoning bylaw, is that it's a commercial mixed use designation. It permits at least 6 stories or a 22-meter height. And I think the way we described it in the secondary plan at the time was whichever is less. There's a range of uses: office, retail, banks, restaurants. But there was an indication in that plan that talked about that the permitted uses would be refined later on by the zoning bylaw. So that's kind of important to keep in mind. So the zoning bylaw has not kept up sort of with what the direction was in the secondary plan, but it wasn't, I think, as much of a priority about 11, 12 years ago. Moving forward and trying to introduce a corridor, it starts to make that a little bit more important to move on to the next steps. Buildings along it are, it mentions that buildings are to face onto the street frontage, and the idea of creating an edge that eventually would be a pedestrian and pedestrian scaled edge. Ensuring that parking and loading and storage areas are screened from view. Again, that's something to keep in mind as I start showing some of the very, very conceptual kind of layouts that we proposed. And also, again, it reiterates that vehicular access points are going to be limited. So the zoning bylaw right now as it exists is showing what's already there. So the number of single detached units that are all along the corridor, the various commercial uses in terms of scale, in terms of types, and the general industrial uses, including the outdoor storage that is found off of the corridor. Next slide. I mean, I think you all know what the existing condition is, but I'll go through just for the case of structuring what we're talking about. So the idea that the existing condition of the corridor, although we've got this vision in the secondary plan, what we see, obviously out on the corridor is a lot of underutilized areas that could have more appropriate support for mixed-use development and for potentially active transportation uses. And when I say that, I mean pedestrians and cycling. And this is sort of the direction that's been put forward in the secondary plan. We see a 4-lane highway with minimal streetscape features, lots of single detached housing in certain portions, south of Finley Mill in particular, and a little bit further north, where there are large lots with varying setbacks that front onto the corridor. Then we have low density commercial uses, many which are auto focused. We've got the Curry Truck Center and radio station there, and some of the highway commercial services. So it has varied employment uses. And then there are some vacant lots and also some extensive environmental areas that are, when you look at the Midhurst secondary plan, it's quite obvious, and there are some that we can touch and some that we can't touch. And that's important to keep in mind when you see what the outline is of the corridor. And then finally, the current existing uses, I mean, I said this right at the beginning, is they don't make full use of the land, and the mixed use designations and what was envisioned are quite underutilized. Next slide, Matt. So when we went through this, as I said, it's quite a long stretch, and I always equate this to consuming an elephant. And how do you do it? You do it one mouthful at a time. And in this case, we went through the corridor and tried to identify which areas seem to make some geographic character sense, and which start to make sense in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, the focus on the intersection at Bayfield and Snow Valley, Finley Mill, and also look at what was developable. So what you see there in the pink outline is the areas that we identified that were adjacent to the corridor and would actually be able to accommodate future growth. Mind you, you do see existing properties, absolutely. But what we're going to be putting forward is, envisioning of what could potentially be accommodated on this area. So within this corridor, we identified 3 character areas. Most importantly, it's the Bayfield Center character area, which has the largest number of areas that were developable and that we felt were the most obvious in order to have a contiguous piece of development along with historical Midhurst. And then we have the north and south character areas, which are, for lack of a better term, they're sort of orphaned off from the central area, and are things that we still identified. We still wanted to show that these were areas that could still be developed, but in the near term, we see these being, they're more long-term or long-term plus in terms of when they could potentially be developed. And what we're sort of doing is focusing in on the central area. So Matt, can you just click it one more time just to get a bit of the animation? So that's identifying the area where we were starting to concentrate. We're not ignoring the other 2 areas, but where I want to sort of head with where we're concentrating our effort. And in particular, the focal point intersection, which is the next click, Matt, if you don't mind. And so the idea is that we're putting forward the Bayfield Corridor Study as a forward-looking document that provides a framework for what the secondary plans mixed-use designation was all about. And what I'm going to show you following this is sort of the tests that we did in terms of demonstrating it through massing studies, and the massing studies generating gross floor areas that start to give us some indication of what we can accommodate, both in terms of number of units, number of persons, and potentially the amount of retail space, which you heard a little bit about earlier. Next slide, Matt. So some things to keep in mind before we move forward is, so you just saw the highlight there. It's identifying what we call areas A, B, C, and D. So that's around that important intersection, and showing that the buildup for that is considered to be near to midterm. So by 2031 onwards, in terms of that. Next click, Matt. And then we look at the shoulder areas to this intersection, which is very logical just from the perspective of how servicing would work and what would make sense in terms of building up on that important intersection. That's areas E, F, and G, and we're looking at that as mid and long-term development. And then finally are the orphan pieces that I mentioned, which are areas H and I. So part of all this, one of the important things to keep in mind is environmental assessments for water and wastewater services will have to be done. And that the establishment of a phasing plan, that's one of the reasons I was kind of showing these bubbles, is very important, because you don't, as we look at this, as I said, because of the extent of it, it's very easy to have redevelopment. You don't want redevelopment to start occurring sort of in a hopscotch manner where it's some of it's happening in one area, one's happening in the other, that we're actually focusing efforts. There are going to be efforts that are made by the municipality towards the future community hub and recreational center at that intersection. So the idea would be that how do we ensure that, how do we leverage all that effort that will go into that in the future? And even if it doesn't happen immediately, it still makes a lot of sense to start looking at that intersection as the right point to do it, because it provides an entry into historic Midhurst, and would be sort of like that nexus that you'd arrive at a particularly an important intersection. Next slide, Matt. So when we were looking at this and looking at those areas A, B, C, and D around the intersection, there were some development assumptions that we were making. And besides just looking at the areas that were within the corridor and identified in the secondary plan, we were only using 4-story heights. And that's why I was saying that we're using some pretty modest numbers as opposed to the 6-story that's ultimate. This is very simple. We were doing this because in the near term, we assume that there's going to probably be most parking will be at grade. And that you won't get the type of development that will require below grade, or there won't be sort of the market for below grade. And this is anecdotal. Now I don't have the analysis, but typically our experience and our best practice, that's how it evolves. We're first starting with buildings with at grade parking, and then as the value of the property increases, it starts to make sense to start looking at below grade parking. The apartment GFA, we use large averages of approximately about 100 square meters, or about 1,100 square feet, for those who can't picture and that's a gross floor area. So I'm not taking out all the things. Usually you can take that back and you can take off 15 to 20%. The job yield calculation was also a conservative one. And quite typically we'll get a job yield based on one person per 30 square meters. And in this case, we doubled that and just trying to show a very conservative number, because I didn't want to overstate these things. It was, you're able to identify very quickly the kind of yield that could be produced. And finally, the only corridor edge that wasn't just along the frontage was area D, which is where the Curry Truck Center is, in that area, just because those properties are quite deep, whereas the other properties are all around 90 to 100 meters in from the right of way. This was the equivalent of a few blocks that you could start to look at. So you'll start to see the demonstration in one of the future slides. So what were the draft resulting yields? And now I'm only talking about the areas that are surrounding the intersection. And you heard a number about accommodating the majority of intensification within Midhurst, and that there's the idea that the most obvious place is to look at the corridor, just because of the amount of land and just because of its centrality and the idea of being able to create a focus. And you can see we're just estimating on a very conservative basis on these demonstrations that you could accommodate 950 residential units, which is, it more than meets the intensification target. And this generates about 1,700 to 1,800 people. When we're looking at it all being at grade retail, as being part of the mixed use, we were estimating we're at somewhere close to 250,000 square feet in total. So not one area. I know there's some concerns about where do you fit some of the stuff. This is finer grained, population-based retail uses. Doesn't mean that there can't be small supermarkets, doesn't mean there can't be things such as that, but we're not thinking of this in terms of big box stores. And then finally, sorry.
Pause for a question, please, Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Director Spagnell. Given this, what we're seeing here and all the other growth that's going to happen, is this sewage treatment plant is it capable to handle this? Is it going to be built in phases? Like, I have two questions, but that's my first question. Can you respond to that, please?
Good question.
Director Spagnell.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Councillor Ritchie. Yes, servicing is definitely a major consideration to be able to support this type of growth. This growth cannot be contemplated without a hookup to the system, and capacity in the system and various other processes would have to happen to ensure capacity in the system to support this kind of growth. So the answer is yes, we need services in order to support this.
Follow on.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. So who pays for that? Are we paying for that? Is the developer going to pay for that? Is it part and parcel? Like, Who pays for that?
Director?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Councilor Ritchie. Similar to the EA process and similar to how things have been done regarding servicing, development charges would pay for a significant amount of what the required servicing would be. And the development and the developers would have to cover the cost associated with those types of servicing under the current secondary plan, the way that it's set up right now. Now, that said, they're based on the development that's already slated to go forward and based on the draft approvals, based on the environmental assessment work that has been completed, the actual EA process that would have to happen in order to support this type of growth would have to be looked at a little bit closer at a later date. This is to take a look at things from a conceptual standpoint and then ultimately provide recommendations as to how we get there.
Follow on?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Allen. It's fine to have a conceptual, but there must be some kind of a basis to go by in order to create a conceptual. So there must be something to say, yes, we can do that. So I'm assuming that there's the potential there to add on to this the sewer system down the road when the time comes. Is that correct?
Director Spagnell?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Councilor Ritchie. I guess to simply put it, the basis for services would essentially be there because there is a sewage plant and a water system being contemplated related to the residential development that is planned for. So there may be the requirement for an extension of the EA process or a new EA process to confirm capacity. But also the basis for considering this concept is, to Mr. Tassiopoulos' points, is in the designations and the direction of the current Midhurst secondary plan that is in place right now. So the basis for the conceptual plans that we're reviewing are inherently incorporated within the designations and within the urban design guidelines that have been drafted and have been approved and adopted as part of the Midhurst secondary plan.
One more question, Mayor.
This is not coming out of thin air. It is following the policy direction within the Midhurst secondary plan.
Good to know. One more question to Director Spagnell. The Curry development there that they've been working on for the last number of years, is that close to coming online? And just explain to me and the rest of us what all that entails. Is it industrial lots? Like what can we see go in there? I think that's that industrial uses is very, very important. And I think we lag in that department. So can you please explain that, please?
Director Spagnell?
Thank you, Mayor. Through to Councilor Ritchie. So the designations for the Curry property are in place. The front portion of the property is commercial mixed use. And then essentially the back portion of the property has would allow for supply outlets, things of that, larger type store, and also employment land uses. Now, as far as status and where that development sits, the designations are in place. However, there haven't been any development applications submitted as part of, to deal with future development of that piece of land. The corridor study right now that we're looking at is providing that concept and a possible policy direction and guidance as to how things may occur along the corridor. It does not pick up the western half of the Curry property, which is designated for essentially employment uses with some additional commercial.
Okay, please. Did you have a further follow-on, Councilor Ritchie?
Just to finish off what I'm talking about, I find all this growth is fine, but we need some industrial lands, and I hope this comes to fruition in order to put businesses there to provide for jobs. Like these residential lots, whether we're talking Midhurst, whether we're talking Elmville, well, we're looking at restaurants. Well, that kind of comes, it's like buying a car. I bought the car, of course there's going to be tires go with it, unless you went to a junkyard. But it comes part and parcel. With that, we need places for job employment, for businesses to locate, to provide jobs. And I think that sometimes with all the people that are looking at this, we missed that boat. It was like for years, we talked about on the fourth there, that Western Mechanical bought. They've developed it. They spent a lot of money. It's a beautiful piece of ground. Are they going to sell lots in there? I'll bet you that if any of that went on the market today, it would just go right out the door because there's people wanting to locate. When we can provide that and provide jobs, we're doing our job. I just want to put that out there. Thank you. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. I think you're going to find a couple of slides. There is provision for commercial at the ground level of all these buildings you're going to be seeing. So
Yes.
please continue, Mr. Tassilopoulos.
Oh.
Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just one question through you, Mayor Allen, to Mr. I can't catch. I'm going to pronounce it. No worries. It's just my down indicators hiding your name right now.
There you go.
Tassilopoulos.
Very good.
Thank you.
Got it.
Thanks. I just was curious. I know years ago, council saw fit to create this buffer, and it also is serving as a buffer to these orphan locations you're speaking of, also to the south end on Bayfield Street. And I'm wondering whether or not you had any opportunity to look at potentially any recommendations with respect to those buffers, because I know in the past there has been, some talk, or at least some people approaching Springwater with respect to some commercial developments along there as well. So I'm wondering what your thoughts on that might be, Mr. Tassilopoulos.
Well, typically, even with the secondary plan, those buffers are environmental buffers typically that are there. They've been identified in a desktop manner. And Director Spagnuolo can probably confirm this. Is in the secondary plan, the requirement is that when somebody wants to develop, they would do a further environmental impact statement or a study in order to be able to define what that real line is, how much developable land there actually is. Quite often you're stuck. And that's why one of the reasons when I said that we're taking a conservative approach, there could be more developable land there, but I don't want to get up here and start saying, well, if you cut away at this and you cut away at that, you can get X number more. I was trying to deal with what we had in place and what we could logically say from the desktop analysis that had been done almost 11, 12 years ago on the secondary plan there, that we can do this for sure. And I think that was sort of the approach that we were taking with that. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Next slide, Matt. So again, I won't spend a lot of time, but just identifying what we call Area A, which is the community hub and the recreational facility area. Just so we can put it in context. Next slide. So B is just to the north. So I'm just providing a bit of an overlook, sort of in plan view, just so you start to get a sense. So I'm sorry I couldn't get one that was more pulled further back, just so you can get a sense of the northwest portion, which is showing that community hub. But the idea is to show a potential of how do we treat this important community focus intersection. And one of the things we'll be talking about eventually in the urban design guidelines, how do buildings, how do they get oriented? How do they turn in order to start to focus this intersection? And what you see there sort of in the light beige, is sort of a foreground area that we don't know how these might be developed over time, but the notion that there's an area for whether it's a plaza in front of these that starts to speak to this more finer grain as we enter into Finley Mill. Next slide. And this is more sort of just a part of the massing analysis that we did. And I want to make sure that everybody understands these are very conceptual. They show envelopes is how I prefer to look at them. This doesn't suggest this is what the buildings are going to look like. What it suggests is that buildings can be designed within sort of that envelope, will have a certain character. What we're trying to get at are the big points. So what you see in red at the bottom, and it looks like quite a bit, but it's that's the mixed use we're trying to identify. that's the commercial. We're trying to identify where the commercial and retail uses are. And then above it, we're just defining it as simple forms, noting where residential or office space could even be. The reason that those other buildings are blue is we're just trying to identify them as being that important focus intersection. You can see that architecturally we make some suggestion that maybe there's a little bit more of a not a height like another level, but some sort of a detail at the corner that gives you that sense. Next slide. And then so looking at area B, which is the area, and I've sort of put a little key map at the top right-hand corner there, just so you can follow along, is the idea of, how does that edge, developed along Bayfield? We are bringing the buildings right up to the property line, and you'll see when we get to the corridor concept that we have in terms of the streetscape, why that's kind of important. It's also important because our concepts made some simple assumptions, which is the area all behind these buildings is parking at grade. We're trying to show where the access points logically would be. So we're only showing one access point into this overall area from Bayfield, but then we show access points from Spence, I believe it is, and from Finley Mill on the other sides. And very important to keep in mind is as we were going through this, we were always thinking about the 5% parkland dedication. So what you see there, a square right next to the arrow in the middle there is what would be 5%. And one of the reasons why we've pulled that up to the street is if we can envision that this is going to be this focal area where we're trying to encourage in the next couple of decades, there's going to be this idea that there could be a good pedestrian quality to these frontages, that you need areas of respite and you need some visual relief. You can't just have buildings constantly. So one of the things we're looking at is not just placing the parks in a particular area. It looks very centralized, but if we were to pull back and look at the greater sort of Bayfield Center character area, you'll see these parks are at probably 400 to 500 meter intervals, or for lack of about a quarter of a mile, a little bit more than a quarter of a mile interval, so that it's a good walking distance in terms of having that relief. And I've just given some general information, but this all breaks down as to part of that total that I showed you on the earlier slide. So we're talking about an area like this, and these again are only 4-story buildings with the ground floor being dedicated to residential. And so those are kind of the numbers that we're going through. I can come back to if anybody wants to speak numbers. Next slide, Matt. So this is the block further south from Finley Mill Road, and on the east side, I've sort of grayed out the west side just so we can concentrate on that. And again, it's just generating an idea of how the buildings would address the street. And in this interval, as you can see, we also have a park space indicated. We're showing where the access points are again. There's another access point further south, but that's from another sub-character area that we had identified. And what's important here is also when we're looking at this access point that's shown here, I think the impression that I want to make sure that we're giving is that could potentially be a future road, just because of the depth of these lots, and especially the depth of the lots on the west side, the Curry Truck lands and so on, that it starts to lead to this requirement that starts to get considered. Also, road interruptions are not a bad thing. They're a bad thing now if your goal is only to move cars. But if the goal is to start to bring things down to a comfortable, human scaled, pedestrian scaled level, I got to start to do something that brings things down in terms of speed, in terms of activity, that starts to give visual cues that you don't just blow past here, you actually have to slow down a little bit. After you get closer to the 27 and 26 turnoff, you can pick up again. But this is sort of as we're moving through what would, I guess, be sort of a new Main Street. Next slide. Yes, sorry.
Question from Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I actually was wondering, Given that Finley Milrose, Snow Valley, and 27 or Bayfield Street, 26, whatever you want to call it,
Yes.
this particular intersection, there are people that use it as a major thoroughfare artery to get out to the 400, to get down to Highway 90, to get over to the 400, to get up towards Elmvale, head towards Perkinsfield and Midland and everything. And I know that coming from 4 lanes up through Barrie, and then coming down the hill, it's 4 lanes, which really hasn't been that long since they actually redesigned it there and did a lot of work on it. Come the summer weekends and things like that, there is a tremendous volume of traffic that passes through there. And I really don't see any viable alternative for these folks to use to get by. So I just, on one hand, I can see how attractive attracting more pedestrians to the area would be. But on the other side of the coin, I can see how difficult it might be if it tended to bottleneck traffic up all the time. I'm wondering if any thought was given to having, as they have in some other areas where you have the buildings moved back a little bit further from the roadway, and then almost have like a service road there with some parking and whatnot. I'm trying to think of a location that's near here that would kind of give you an example, but I'm hoping you can envision what I'm talking about. It's almost like off the main road, there's a little bit of a service kind of roadway with parking on it, and then commercial entrances from that on there.
No, I completely understand what you're getting at. What I want to impress upon everybody is that this corridor width right now with 4 lanes would not be changed. In fact, you could probably go to 3 lanes in either direction. I'm not doing a transportation analysis, so I don't want you to take it that way. What I want to make sure is understood is the right of way itself is over 40 meters. Like it's a lot of distance, a lot of land to get over, and it's actually quite trying in order to try and see how do you develop it and create a proper edge. And what I'm hoping, Councillor Cabral, that I can just show you a demonstration. Again, these are all demonstrations. It doesn't mean, but I wanted to be able to put a vision ahead, because we can't move towards something if we don't have some sort of a framework. I'm not, as I said before, it's not going to happen exactly like this, but it's to start to illustrate what could happen, and what could this generate, and where, what are some of the steps that can be taken to sort of make this a reality. And as I mentioned before, I don't see this happening overnight. This is going to happen over a long period of time. But unless there's a goal or a finish line that we can start to approach, then there's nothing to speak to. And so the way I want council to think about this is that we're trying to create a framework, and you can criticize it and we can refine it, we can adjust it, but we need a starting point, a basis from which to have a discussion. So I think maybe when you see the concept of the sort of the road plan, it may alleviate some of the concern about how would this work. If it doesn't, I'd be more than happy to come back to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just out of curiosity as well, since the roadways basically under the jurisdiction of the provincial government, I guess we can still look at this, but there would be some, I guess, partnership concepts down the road. Is that what you're envisioning?
You're speaking to me, Councillor Cabral?
Yes. Go ahead, and then Director Spagnell.
Okay.
No, after you, Mr. Tasiopoulos. And
okay,
then
through you, Mayor Allen. Sorry, I hope I haven't been too informal. Through you, Mayor Allen. With these types of, this happens all over Ontario. And I know I'm going to give an example that you're going to say, well, that's not really, that's not really spring water. But I want to just sort of give an example. The portion of Highway 7, if you know it, in the GTA that runs across Markham, runs across Vaughan, and Richmond Hill. Those portions of Highway 7 are actually handed over to the municipality. But it's taken care of in a joint manner. But there are other examples in smaller municipalities, not at that level, because that's a major corridor, but a lot of the other smaller towns that I've seen, it wasn't, they didn't have this kind of a corridor. So all of a sudden the scale of the corridor wasn't the same. So, you know, one of my colleagues gave me an example of Aylmer with Highway 3. And I was like, well, I can see how that's been handed over and how that's changed, but it's that corridor is like 3 lanes total, and it's not like it's not the same character. But in terms of the width, in terms of the scale of the corridor, the one that I was thinking of immediately was Highway 7, or what they're going to call Avenue 7 eventually. And some of the, I'll be very honest with you, some of the solutions or some of the conceptual ideas that I have in the road section I'll show eventually, sort of pick up on the language that happened there, because I think it's been pretty successful in terms of creating, how do you introduce vehicular traffic and still provide engagement for pedestrians. So, next slide. Oh, any other questions? Sorry.
Director Spagnol, did you have anything to add to that?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Yeah, I think the only thing I'd like to add is the township has had just preliminary discussions with the Ministry of Transportation. The ministry is well aware that as far as the Finley Mill Bayfield Street intersection, that is a major focus as far as the mid-secondary plan goes. And it's through this process and through stakeholder consultation that the ministry will be contacted and those discussions will occur.
Okay, Councillor Hanna.
Thank you, Mayor. And just an observation, I don't really need to ask the question. I'll wait until we're done, but I was waiting for the presentation to be over. But I will comment that I agree with Councillor Cabell. A service road on the east and west sides of Bayfield Street would make more sense. And the perfect example is the QEW at Dixie Road. There's the big Dixie Mall on the south side of the Queen Elizabeth Highway. There's a north and south service road that allows people to travel both sides of the QEW and also access that mall. The other thing I'd just point out quickly is that going forward, the Finley Mill Road is supposed to be 3 lanes and Snow Valley Road 4 lanes. And that may have an impact too on the conceptual drawings that we're seeing here today. Just an observation. I'll finish up when we're done.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Tassiopoulos.
Thank you, Mayor. Next slide. So this is the area D. So it's just south of the community hub that's envisioned. And I'll go through it with you in terms of we're showing a combination here. So we've got the corridor edge that we're showing with the mixed use idea. The area that you see behind there, that gap in the back, that's to define where the parking area is. Then there's a sort of a thin strip of green, which we're not getting into the detail of rendering, but that would be sort of a planted buffer. And then we get into what could be live work or townhouse development. And the idea is that any kind of, if there is residential or mixed use residential development that happens in the interior of this very deep property, that you would start to think about it in terms of it being new blocks and how it could function properly as with new streets that are accessed. And you'll forgive me, I don't think it's called Echo Road once it heads further west from Bayfield, but that you have that other potential access. So you've got the soccer fields further to the south, and then you sort of have this residential, more intensified residential community. And so the idea is it's mixed use in terms of a linear mixed use, what we call, where it's not just done by height. And I know that in the secondary plan, it states that it's the mixed use as it's envisioned is supposed to be above grade the residential. But I just wanted to give an example of the kind of residential that one would be supportive of a corridor uses, would further support retail activities, would further create sort of that defined kind of area that populates that focus intersection. And most importantly, starts to introduce one of the things that was mentioned, I think much earlier in one of the other presentations, starts to introduce housing variety and tenureship, which is sorely lacking right now. So the ability for somebody to age in place and to stay within Midhurst are enhanced by this idea. And then the other thing that you'll notice is there is green space, again, reaching at that 5% space. There was some concern about what happens with employment lands further to the south. There is sort of a defined sort of buffer boundary at the west edges of what we're showing. Now, this kind of development, again, would probably require some rethinking about how the zoning and the permissions work. Not because it's because, as I mentioned before, the way that mixed use was defined. But it's very difficult to try and put in that sort of amount of mixed use into a very deep property like the Curry Truck Center. At the same time, making some sense of it, making some logical sense of how would this function if it was all mixed use in the traditional sense as it was thought of in the secondary plan. So we're just trying to show the potential for the land and how it could be laid out. And the layout that you see there are all based on standard conventional lot depths for buildings. There, in this case, we're talking about 60-meter depth blocks and anywhere from 150 meters and maybe a little bit more in terms of length. And so in terms of the lots, and we're trying to take some reasonable numbers. So, and we were only showing this as townhouses, like singular townhouses. So if there was some desire that they're stacked, we're talking about increasing the density within. And that explains to you, if you look at the left side, why we've got so many residential units. It starts to increase, and the number of persons, because townhouse types have a higher number when we're multiplying the number of units, have a higher number, it starts to generate a little bit of a different number, and in some cases an increase in it. Next slide, Matt. This is the area further south, and it's again, it's across. So it's Echo Road and Bayfield Street, and I was just trying to show this because I was asked by staff to explain how does transitioning help. So this is just very, very high level, just showing how the massing works, how we're addressing the corner. And if those buildings look very close to you, they're actually not. They're over 20 meters away from each other, and these are, again, low buildings. So Matt, if you want to go to the next picture. So we're being asked about how does a transition work, and the reason I include this slide is just to show that we step the building down. These aren't very tall buildings; these are 4-story buildings, but we're stepping it down and we're making sure that we have a building face, rear building face to rear building face that's exceeds, like in this case, we identified it was around 38 meters. I can tell you that when we were doing the concepts and doing the drawings, we were about 13 meters set back from the property line. And the whole point behind that was to allow for a buffer, allow for an access point for vehicles, and allow for a bit of room so that you're not walking in the you're not walking in the driveway. You're actually walking on a bit of a side, a walkway next to the building. So just so you get a sense of what this means when we're looking at the adjacent established residential areas. Again, these lots are very deep, especially along the east side. They were between 90 and 100 meters in length, and sorry, I'll put it, between almost 300, or I guess the other way of saying it is 300 yards, so about 900 feet. Sorry. 100 meters or 100 yards or 300 feet. Next slide. So this speaks to, and I've sort of just identified on the key map where I've got this constant, and a big chunk of the corridor is about 43.6 meters in terms of right-of-way width. We got this information from the transportation master plan work that was being done by WSP, and we understand that this is, believe it or not, the right-of-way, which is 43.6 meters. And so what is this composed of? There was some suggestion about, how do you create a good pedestrian focus? How do you start to introduce the active transportation components that were envisioned? And how do you start to look about, how do you start looking at something into the future? And what I just want you guys to just suspend your disbelief just a little bit and just think about how this could potentially work. And this is, again, as I said, a 43.6 meter right of way. We've maintained the lanes, the drive lanes at widths that make sense and function and meet transportation authority requirements. We're showing a median that would incorporate, I mean, you don't see it there, but the idea is that it would incorporate left turn lanes, and where it's not a left turn, you basically have a planted median. So just, you can sort of imagine along the edge. And then we start to break out in what we call the boulevard edge. So not where cars are traveling, but where cars are either stationary or there's tree planting zones or there's street furniture. So this is where, there'd obviously have to be like a lot of discussion, but for the purposes, again, of a demonstration, I wanted to show that you could potentially have right next to the drive lanes, a street tree planting zone that would have lay-by parking all along there. Or if it turns out to be that this is envisioned to be expanded to 3 lanes on either side, could easily be converted into an additional lane. Then the idea of how do you introduce cycling in an area that you don't typically see it, and how do you do it? And our best practices and other applications that especially our active transportation team has been involved with all over Southern Ontario is that you separate the cycling lanes. You create these safe, separated, what we call cycling tracks. And we found that if you give people that option, more likely than not, they won't use it for all their trips, we know that, but they will use it. They will actually, because there's a safe and really defined place in which to do that. The other benefit to it is, what I heard earlier about the service, it starts along with the street tree planting and the lay-by parking and the separated cycling track, it starts to create that nice buffer to the active street, that to the active vehicular travel that's happening on Bayfield. And then because we have that width, we have the ability to have yet a second tree planting zone. So this ends up being this really green boulevard that creates a buffer between vehicular traffic and cycling traffic and pedestrians, but that it's wide enough and broad enough that you could easily accommodate these uses all along that zone. And I'm not talking about doing this from the southern end near Carson all the way up to 27 and 26. I'm thinking about this in terms of how does the focus area function, or the area just north of what I'm showing here, how would that function? So that would be sort of your visual cue, your indication that you've entered into what's the community focus in Midhurst and what's the community focus on Bayfield Street corridor. So that's a little bit of a, sorry if it's a long one, but it's a bit of a narration. And I've also tried to show how the buildings react to that frontage. So you'll see they're not very tall. They're actually not very, like a 4-story building is not tall. And that's why a 6-story building easily is accommodated here, and it still would not be very tall, just given the width of the corridor. And the last thing I'll leave you with, one of the reasons why a lot of times we talk about more height is because we're trying to, again, play on those visual cues. Thing is, we are cognizant that, what's the market in the near term to midterm? And so that's what I was just trying to show. What could that possibly look like if it was to be transformed and we have development in the near and midterm? Next slide, Matt. And so finally, the results of the work that we've done, and we did similar concepts for the other sub areas. What I wanted to do is I wanted to focus on the areas that we think are phase 1 areas and the areas where they should be focused on. But just preliminarily, our recommendations in terms of the land use framework is that we provide further policy guidance to support the community hub and the community focus intersection and articulate the types of retail uses that would occur there. Ensure that the zoning bylaw is amended as per the direction of the secondary plan, and to specify the permitted uses that are indicated in the Midhurst secondary plan, but it actually gives you leeway to indicate what you want to permit. Things change over time, so you have that ability. And the idea is also to permit more diverse, dense residential and commercial uses. We would be looking at phasing and timing of development to be focused and to avoid, what we call, what I called earlier hopscotch, but out of phase redevelopment, so that it can be concentrated. And you don't want to dilute, especially where you don't have the capacity to do that, in the sense that you want to focus it where the servicing is most likely to be. And so that's a big determinant. And the other is that you want to focus it so that it's almost like you're planting a seed and you're trying to get the critical mass of activity happening in a particular location, so that it gives that, it's a catalyst that helps it grow over time, north and south. And we talked about updating the land use plan and the secondary plan policies, just to show that boundary corridor as we were indicating in the draft, and have some more specific language about the corridor. That's from land use. From a transportation and servicing, I think there was some question about that earlier from Councillor Ritchie, was about expanding the municipal water and wastewater servicing toll lots within the corridor, to consolidate the access points wherever we could, because we still want the corridor to function, but at the same time, we need to make sure that the access points are still there, so that we can get into the proposed mixed uses or any other commercial activity that happens along the corridor, and that the MTO will need to be consulted for that. Provide a streetscape. I gave you one example of what that could be with public realm enhancements that support active transportation and safe separated cycling zones, and providing further public realm enhancements, which is what that is, in the center character area. Next slide, Matt. And then finally, just with the urban design, the idea is that although there are urban design guidelines that are already in the secondary plan, this is an opportunity for us to drill down a little bit more and speak to building orientation more specifically, location of parking, how things are screened from view, et cetera. It also gives an opportunity to start to generate a section like what I showed in one of the previous slides, where I showed a potential for how it could work. Again, that corridor would need to be discussed with MTO and to make sure, but again, we need a basis to discuss something from. And really importantly, all the way across, is we need to ensure that there's green amenity space, and that park space is always provided at a minimum of 5%, and that we locate it in such a way that it is provided in central areas, could be lead-ins into potential trails and green spaces, but that they're also at intervals that are another element that helps support walking and help support pedestrian activity. I know it sounds like a reach, but it isn't. If you give enough elements that support pedestrian use, pedestrians will use it. And it's not to say they're not driving there. They could drive there, park, but then they make their way down the corridor by foot instead of feeling the need to jump back in the car in order to do things. Emphasizing, again, the key intersection that's going to be very important. And I think there's an opportunity there to look at those corners as a true sort of entry into Midhurst and a historic kind of important intersection. And that would be the area where you could potentially have plazas, could have public art encouragements, something that's historic can be placed there that lets you know this is the focus, central area in Midhurst, or that you're entering historical Midhurst. And as I mentioned before, providing guidelines for the building orientations and how they could potentially work. And then finally, re-emphasizing, as the secondary plan and the guidelines secondary plan already do, parking cannot be cannot be located between the buildings and the street frontage, because we'll never get that pedestrian edge that is desired typically for such development. And I think that's probably the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I know I went through that pretty quickly, but there's a lot to cover, as I said.
Okay, Councillor Hannah. Actually, can we receive the report and then we'll open it up for discussion? You moving to receive it, Councillor Hannah?
Sure.
Yeah, seconded by Councillor Moore. All right, Councillor Hannah.
Okay, thank you. I guess my observations, I'll start with the corridor. That's our main commercial growth area. I think we all recognize that, and we need to regulate it. We got to make sure that whatever we do there is going to generate the most commercial taxes we can for Springwater Township. I don't agree that it should be a residential area at all. I think it should be all commercial. That's my view. If you look further south down Bayfield Street, all the way to the 400, yeah, I don't think there's any commercial or any residential properties there. If there are, they're very few. It's all commercial. And that's what I would envision definitely for our area of Bayfield Street. The other thing I should point out is that there's a lot of threshold deterrence, or there seems to be threshold deterrence every time somebody comes forward that wants to develop something on Bayfield Street. So I was hoping this presentation today would help alleviate some of that. And the examples I have to give is the Saddleland wanted to build that major convention, major hotel, restaurants, and seniors area. And again, because of our need to have access out to Bayfield Street, which he said he did have, and servicing, we weren't able to support that. Then there was the folks that came forward with the seniors palliative care type accommodations for the end of life facility, which was on the other side of the Bayfield Street. Again, we weren't able to support that, and I think we've lost that one as well, but I don't know for sure. So my argument here is that we need to protect Bayfield Street, but we have to make sure that those threshold deterrents are not preventing us from being able to go forward when we have opportunities. And I was hoping that the presentations we've got today would have helped us be able to move forward. So it sounds like we're no further off than we were before. From what I've heard today, that's my sense of the whole thing. What I didn't hear today was that Snow Valley Road, my understanding from the Midhurst secondary plan, Snow Valley Road, well, it's going to be serviced with water and sewer line going through there, is also being identified as our industrial commercial strip. I haven't heard anything today talking about Snow Valley Road and our access to the lots along there and how we're going to develop that. I thought there would have been something on that as well today. Those are my major comments, I guess, to make it as short as I possibly can. I would like to have seen something, as I say, to do that, to address those things. And then going just a little bit further north, we have the intersection of 26, 27. There's work going to be done on that intersection. We've heard in the Midhurst secondary plan, originally it was going to be a traffic circle. I don't know if that's still on the table. I would like to have heard some direction on that today, what's going forward. Anyway, those are my brief comments. I just think we need to capitalize, I've said, on Bayfield Street. We need to do it right. We need to regulate it, but I don't think it's an area for residential, given that the Midhurst secondary plan is going to bring thousands of new units to the southern part of our township. I think we better stick to commercial where we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Good comments. I'll start with Mr. Tassiopoulos and then go to Director Spagnell on those.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Hannah, through you, Mayor Allen. It doesn't presuppose that it's all going to be residential, Councillor Hannah. What I was identifying was how residential could be accommodated very easily and could meet intensification targets. The mixed use designation along there does not preclude there being office spaces above retail, does not preclude there being, even if there's a care facility being above the retail. What it does mention is, again, what I was trying to point out is that you could accommodate that residential, The reason that I haven't shown the rest of the sections along the corridor is because we're trying to focus the conversation on what we think is going to be the important and focal point within Bayfield. With respect to Snow Valley Road, it's the only thing that's included in the corridor is that corner lot. That's why we weren't touching on the interior. We were sticking to what the secondary plan has identified in a very general way where that boundary is for mixed use. So we're not threatening the use of the employment uses, but I think I mentioned that we had some sort of buffering that was being proposed. I'm hoping I've covered off some of the things that you asked.
Let me just go to Director Spagnell, and then I'll follow on with you, Councillor Hanna.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I'd just like to take the time just to address those other uses that were referenced. The key policy issue with respect to the uses along Bayfield Street were that those lands are currently outside of the settlement area, and they're located within the greenbelt buffer that was established within the official plan. So through the official plan review process, those matters have been identified as something for consideration that ultimately we're going to have to address through additional review and as part of the official plan review process. However, those lands have not been identified within the secondary plan through the mixed use commercial designation because they're outside of the settlement area. The one key factor as well, I think, just to build on Mr. Tassiopoulos' comments regarding, not precluding office types among or above the commercial uses, is the idea was also to focus on the Hasty Tract and the community lands that the municipality is walking down that path to bring community lands on stream, to have something of more of a community focus. And the introduction of having some sort of residential along Bayfield Street is to build on that dynamic so that you have a sense of community with respect to some opportunity for residential. Those are just my clarifications with respect to the preliminary development applications that were brought forward at the top of Bayfield, and just a little bit more insight, I guess, as to where WSP is coming from with respect to building on the investment that council is looking at making at that intersection with respect to the Hasty Tract and trying to build on that.
Follow on, Councillor Hanna.
Thank you. And just going back to the presentation, we talked about, we heard about walking trails, we heard about green spaces, we heard about bicycling, and we heard about residential accommodations, not just offices. That's why I pointed out that I think it should be commercial as much as possible. My other comments were related to the entire presentation we've seen today, where we talked about Elmville, we talked about the commercial spaces that were available. My point being was that we heard about those commercial spaces. We did not hear about Snow Valley Road and the fact that is one of our major commercial routes, is my understanding anyway, under the Midhurst secondary plan. Those were my comments, not just to deal with the corridor, but I was responding to the entire presentation that we heard this afternoon.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, Director Spagnell, what are so next steps are outlined on this this current slide here?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. So really, this marks the start of the engagement process, where we will be scheduling stakeholders meetings to go out to the general public, to go out to anybody who identified an interest in the official plan review, specifically as it relates to these background studies. The idea is to try to move forward and finalize the population-related employment market study, along with the intensification strategy and the Bayfield Street corridor. Of course, what WSP and staff will be doing is taking the comments from this meeting, taking a look at those studies to finalize those studies, to bring them back to council for endorsement and acceptance. and at which point we will be moving forward towards the stakeholder meetings. As a result of the background studies and the findings of the review of all the comments received, WSP will be moving forward to draft official plan policies, and then we go back again to council stakeholder exercises to obtain comments to refine those draft policies with the objectives to finalize the official plan, and at which point we would have to go to a statutory public meeting again to receive comments. And then after that, we would essentially be taking any of those comments, making any necessary revisions to the official plan, and then bringing it forward for council's adoption.
Okay, as always, there's a lot that's been discussed today. If any councillor wants to further their thoughts with respect to this and send an email to you, Director Spagno, with thoughts and considerations about what's been discussed, they're welcome to do so, correct?
That is correct. My door is always open. I guess now my email is always open. So please feel free to send any comments you have, any questions, and we'll do our best to address them and get back to you. We thank you for this afternoon.
Okay. Okay, council, before we take a vote on receiving this report, any further comments or questions? All right, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you. All right, can I have a mover? Thank you, gentlemen. We're just going to end up the meeting now. Thank you for your input, reporting. A mover and seconder for the confirmatory bylaw, please. Councillor Moore and Councillor Ritchie, that the bylaw 220-109 to confirm and adopt the proceedings of council at the special meeting held on December 14 listed herein be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? That is carried. And a motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Ma and Councillor Moore, the special meeting of the Township of Springwater is now adjourned at 4:42 p.m. to meet again at regular meeting on December 16, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you for your participation, and we'll see you online in a couple of days.